Okay, so on to the favorite part of the customer lifecycle for every single person, which is they've paid and they've signed and the deal's won, you've got the money. Awesome. So now that you've got the client to pay and sign, well, you actually are liable to having to do all the services for them, right? And, all of that kind of stuff hopefully can be broken down, right? Like perhaps the actual rendering of a service might not be able to be automated. So in my business, we do DJ photo video services. I'm not automating the photographer, I'm not automating the DJ, I'm not automating the videographer. But everything around kind of the service being rendered, I am trying to automate, right? And that starts with this new lead workflow. And I've broken it down into two different workflows here. We have the contract one part one, and then we also have the contract one part two here. And we're going to walk through every single step here just so you kind of get an idea of, first of all, what's going on, but more importantly, why it's happening the way it is. Feel free to change things up to as you see fit, but this is what works well for my business. So to start, we have two triggers here. We have one that is when the client goes ahead and pays the invoice, right? Awesome. The second trigger is if the pipeline has been changed to deposit paid, right? So circling back here on the opportunities tab in your CRM, right? If somebody is moved to the deposit paid step of the funnel, then this workflow will trigger. So there is a manual step to triggering this. There's also an automatic step to triggering this. If you guys use a platform like PandaDoc as well, and you want to integrate it into a third party, you can add another trigger, and this would be the inbound webhook trigger, right? And similarly, if you watch the contract signed workflow, what I discussed there is, yeah, you'd have to set up an inbound webhook trigger. This would require you to create or match the email based on, the incoming webhook with the email on file for the client, and then you would pair those up together and then start the automation based on that particular client. Okay, but that's something we can also cover in a later module too, and I'll get into more detail with that. So the first thing is that when this happens, right, we're going to filter out anyone who does not include the tag contract one. So what's going on here is that with this workflow, we want to make sure that we're not entering somebody into the workflow twice. So we want to make sure that this only fires once and that person can't have the contract tag already. Because if they have the contract tag already, it means they've already been entered into this workflow, because later on in this workflow, we add that tag down somewhere down here. We add, here we go, contract one, right? And the reason this is important, right? The reason why this matters is because let's say you structure your payment in installments. You have deposits, remaining balance, maybe you have 4 payments, okay? And let's say that you don't put that in here. Well, maybe every single time an invoice is paid, if you didn't filter down to the correct invoice, which could be like the agreement or the initial contract invoice, this would keep firing. So you might end up paying the remaining balance, and then this fires again, and you welcome them on as a new client. And obviously it's a bad reflection on you if you send the same message twice. They're going to know it's automated, and it just doesn't look good. So we want to avoid that entirely. And how we do that is making sure that we have a filter set or a conditional statement set up so that they can only enter this in if they don't have the contract one tag, which we're going to immediately add on to them as soon as they enter this workflow. So circling back in here, right, we have that filter set up. Now, this is up to taste. This is just what I like to do with my team, but I like to generate a ChatGPT kind of prompt here. And I just like to say, create me a story that's 100 words in length about a superhero named whatever the sales rep was that closed the deal, who had to sell the client's name, a package for their whatever services in order to save the world. And they accomplished it. Make it cinematic, make it a cinematic story that inspires the readers in the struggle. Whoever the sales rep was, who went through to overcome this challenge. Write it like a Shakespeare play. I always love doing this because I just find it so amusing and so funny every single time in your sales channel in Slack when a story comes up like this. Our sales team likes it as well. It's a nice community building piece. I do this. You don't have to do this, but that's just something I like to do. And then we fire that off in this Slack message here, right? So we'll just say whoever the sales rep was closed the whatever amount of dollar deal. It could be like $2,000 deal, $1,000 deal. And then here's the ChatGPT response that we just generated up top here. So that story is automatically sent into Slack. Next thing that we're doing here is we're making sure that DND, which stands for do not disturb, is disabled. So let's say for example, somebody unsubscribes to one of your emails and they later go to pay the contract. Well, you want to make sure that obviously D&D is not enabled. Otherwise, they're not going to receive any text messages or any emails in the system. So the cool thing about D&D is you can enable it. You can also disable it, right? And in this case, we're just making sure that anyone who pays and signs is disabled so we can contact them. Next thing here is we're going to change the meeting location to phone. This is up to personal taste. This is just assuming that you offer in-person meetings, phone call meetings and Google Meets or video meets, and we're just restoring it back to the default, which is a phone, so that if you book an appointment and forget about, changing this, it's going to default to a phone appointment instead of a video appointment. If this isn't applicable to your business, just make sure to delete this module and all the modules like this in the other workflows as well. I did put this in pretty much every single one, so it might take, another 5 minutes to kind of go through and delete that if you don't want that feature. Okay, cool. So the next thing here, we're just once again sending off that Slack message, and then we're going to remove some tags, and we're also removing what that tag is specifically is contract lost. It's not like very common, but I do find that a lot of people, not a lot of people, but people will end up being lost for whatever reason. 6 months goes by, they come back, they're like, hey, Jono, we actually changed our mind, or some obstacle that we had to go through is now behind us and we want to move forward with your services. At that point in time, we just want to make sure that if we had marked them as contract lost in the past, that is no longer the case. We remove that so we can proceed onwards with the correct tags. Anything here, any other tags indicating like they've unsubscribed or contract lost, you could go ahead and add that in there just to make it a bit clearer as you're scanning the client to see what tags are on them in the CRM. Okay, cool. Next thing, updating contact fields. You don't have to do this. This doesn't link to any particular automation in the workflows that I've built. It does in my particular company, I believe, but it's just for like a very specific use case. But just in case you guys want custom fields to indicate whether somebody, like what payment stage they're at or whatnot, we have this. I do like updating the contact type from lead to customer. This is a built-in Go High Level field. And then obviously, and also just changing the payment status to paid. Okay, next kind of deal here is we're just seeing if the source is empty. For whatever reason, if somebody's made it this far into the cycle and the source is not been labeled properly, we're just going to update that source module as unassigned so we can at least categorize it as uncategorized, right? So we kind of know that. And then next thing is we'll just add in that opportunity. We're going to update that to deposit paid. And once again, with all this kind of stuff, you'll notice that this is a trigger up here, entering them into the stage, but they can't be entered in the same workflow twice unless it's an inbound webhook trigger. But yeah, this is going to block them because they're already in it. So we're good to go there. Then we have ClickUp Management Project System webhook. There's two ways to do this. I'll be explaining this in the project management module, but essentially we're going to create a project management system using ClickUp that's going to really break down their whole the whole fulfillment process into tasks and then delegate those tasks to your employees or your team or maybe yourself. And there will be certain priorities, certain deadlines so that nothing kind of gets swept under the rug because, when you're dealing with a lot of clients, that tends to happen. And I've been through that enough times with my own business. I've made these mistakes enough times to know it's just never worth it. And it's always good to stay organized. And something like this, when you set it up, and it just runs, you can just set it and forget, and it's nice, and things just hopefully don't, get swept under the rug. And even if they do, it's just less likely than it was before. So A great system to put in place. Next thing is we're just adding in the contract one tag, right? So we're now segmenting this person for in our system to say, hey, this person, they're a customer. They've paid, they've signed, they're good to go. And this tag's important because not only would it stop somebody from entering into this workflow again with this particular, conditional logic here, but I actually use the contract one tag in multiple future scenarios further down the customer journey. Like, for example, when the contract is complete or when reviews are going out or whatnot, we want to make sure that a lot of these workflows, they can only actually enter it if they do have the contract one tag. So this is a great way for us to segment who's paid, who hasn't. And if we have like date-based triggers where it's like, hey, 2 days after an event, we want to send an email. We want to make sure that, first of all, that person is actually a client of ours. It's not just sending an email 2 days after anyone's event, because what happens if you jump on a call with somebody and you don't close the deal, right? And then they go with your competitor. Well, you don't want to say, hey, thanks for working with us if they never worked with us, right? So we're segmenting with the contract one tag so that we can segment our audience based on who went with us and who did not go with us. Next thing is we're going to remove people, and this is kind of like a consistent theme I hope you're recognizing here. We're removing that particular customer from all the past workflows. We don't want them in the new lead workflow. We don't want them in the sales call workflow. We don't want them in the contract signed workflow or the cancellation workflow or the no-show workflow. Any of those, it's just they're going to be wiped. The slate's clean. We're removing them from any of those workflows so that they're not sent the wrong messages. Okay, sweet. So next thing here is we're going to wait 5 minutes. And we're just going to make sure that, first of all, we're setting this in an appropriate time between 5 and 9 p.m. So it's not like 2 a.m. in the morning. You can set this to however you want. And we're just going to check once again if this is an existing client, right? So one more check. We're making sure that they're not in the contract one part 2 workflow, and they're also not in the client notifications part 1 workflow as well. The client notification part 1 workflow is what we'll cover in another module, but in a nutshell, it drips out communication between you and the client over time leading up to the date that the service is rendered. So a week before that date, we'll say, hey, just checking in, blah, 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 whatever, right? Maybe asking them, hey, can you pay the remaining balance? 2 weeks before, we're just going to try and schedule a phone call. Those are just examples of what you could do, but that's kind of the gist of what the client workflow actually does for you. So as long as they're not in those workflows, then we're good to proceed, right? If they are, well, then they've already been entered into this workflow and we don't want to continue on. So it's another fail-safe. And then we have a condition here, right? And that condition is that, is this assigned user does not include this person. And I actually just really quickly updated it there just because this was the opposite way around. So assigned user includes Jonathan Califf, okay? Or it doesn't. So let me break down what's going on in this step, right? So depending on the size of your business, maybe you're just running things by yourself. Maybe you have a team of project managers, event coordinators, whatever, that handle the clients afterwards. Maybe the sales reps handle the same people that before the sale is done, after the sale is done. There's lots of different ways to go about it, right? And a lot of businesses are going to respond to this different ways. But with this workflow here, what we're doing is we're setting up the possibility so that you can pass this off from the sales rep to a project manager, right? So you're transferring that client onto somebody else for the rest of the customer journey. But let's say you're a one-person company and you're the sales rep and you're also the person that is going to be handling the clients on the back end. So we have 2 paths here. Path A, which is over here, is going to be if you do not want anyone to be changed. And path B, which is here, is if you have project managers that you want to pass that client onto, right? And essentially what's going to happen is, if it's going to maintain you as the sole assigned user, then it's just going to say, hey, thanks for paying. Awesome. Great, here's the next steps. And if we pass on to somebody else, then we'll have this sales rep sign off being like, hey, great working with you. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it off to the project manager. They're going to introduce themselves in a couple minutes. Then in a couple minutes, it's going to flip the user from the sales rep to the project manager. And then they're going to reach out and be like, hey, thanks for, choosing us. I just spoke with Kevin or whatever your sales rep is. And, just wanted to introduce myself here and tell you about the next steps, right? So we're just having a trade-off if we want to. And if you don't want this to happen for certain people, like maybe you're doing both sides of the coin, maybe you just put yourself for other people. And if that, if the user on the file is this person, then you just keep it with that person. If not, you pass off to project managers here. So one of two paths. And then this, if you're not going to pass it off, that pretty much terminates the rest of this workflow. And that's just going to send them all the way down to this particular step here, where it's going to add them to the next workflow. Sweet. So yeah, this go-to path is going to essentially just add them straight into here. And then if we end up wanting to assign a project manager, they're going to go down path B here. They're going to have the tag customer pass off associated with them. And keep this in mind. We'll return back to this in part 2 of this workflow. But in part 1, they're just going to have that tag assigned to them. And then we might have a split here depending on how many different project managers you have. You can keep adding people as you see fit, and we're just kind of round robining it to people at this point in time. But you'll notice we're not assigning anyone yet, right? And we're not assigning anyone yet to this client because we still want to send out a text message on behalf of the sales rep being like, hey, we're going to assign this project manager and they're going to reach out to you. But we don't want to just exclude this message, immediately assign the project manager, and then have them message and then never have the sales rep follow up, because I feel like that might leave a bad taste in the client's mouth. So we're going to have a 2-part step here where, first of all, it goes down one of the split paths, and you can choose the percentage that traffic goes to one project manager over the next. And then from there, you just want to assign it to that particular project manager, right? So maybe you have a path for project manager 1, and then you update it to project manager 1 right here. You're going to have to go in and change the assign project manager field here. How you do that is by going into settings, and in settings, we can go to custom fields here, and we're going to update the assigned project manager, right? So we'll just edit this, and let's just say your project manager is John Smith. You just go ahead and add that in there, and then it's good to go, right? So you just assign it to the right person, and then we'll have both paths align once again on this particular text message, and the sales rep will be sending this out being like, hey, Bob, or whoever the client's first name is, thanks for paying the deposit. We're all set on our end. Stacy, or whoever the client or the project manager will be, is going to take over the onboarding stages of your project. They'll send you an email shortly. It'll wait 1 minute and then double down with an email as well, just saying, hey, we received the deposit. Thank you so much. Everything's good to go. And Stacy, the project manager, is going to reach out. Then we're going to add them into contract 1. Part 2, which is now this workflow. You'll notice there is no trigger here because it's automatically being added from this workflow. So there is no need to have a trigger here. And then we'll first of all add the contract 1 tag. We'll double down with this again just to make sure. And then you don't need to have that there. I just, as a preference, I always like just doubling down just in case sometimes these tags, in the off chance maybe 1 in 1,000 it doesn't get added for whatever reason, there's a bug, and I just always like doubling down on that because it's such an important part. And then just removing from all these other workflows one more time, and then based on whoever we assigned as the project manager in this field, right? So whether it was name number 1 or name number 2, whoever these people actually are, then we'll figure out, okay, if it's name number 1, then it goes down path number 1. So if that person was Jean, then we'd assign it to Jean. If that person was Paula, then we'd assign it to Paula, right? So we're just, whoever was selected in that field here, we're now going to assign them over because the sales rep has sent that text message and that email to that particular customer, right? So we're good to go there. And then we're going to add them into the client notifications part 1. And this is going to be a workflow that we cover in a later module. Partly why I like separating these out too is just to make sure, and you can change this, but I just want to make sure that there's no stop on response. So in case the client's like, hey, to the sales rep, thanks so much for everything, you've been great, I also want to make sure that workflow continues to flow, but you could also just put stop on response and potentially add these into one workflow if you wanted to. Okay, sweet. So we've assigned the sales rep now, and we've added them into the client workflow notifications. We also added them into the project management system before. So we're doing a lot of different things in this, but I'm just breaking it up into separate modules so it's a bit more digestible for instead of just, throwing everything into one. We're going to wait 5 minutes, and then 5 minutes after the sales rep's finished, then we're going to send off messages. And this is coming back to that tag customer pass off, right? So remember, if we are passing this on to a project manager, they have the tag customer pass off here. And then we're going to check once again, if they have customer pass off, that means that now we've assigned the project manager. And if they don't have that tag, that means that the same person who's the sales rep is the same person who's the project manager. So we're not going to, send a message being like, hey, it's John from X company reaching out, just wanted to say hi, because you've already been in communication with them since the beginning, right? So it changes the messaging slightly. So we'll say, hey, Bob, we've received the contract and deposit. Thanks so much. We're very excited to be working with you, right? The next steps are here. And that's pretty much it, right? And then if we do pass it off to the project manager, we're going to say, hey, we received the contract and deposit. Thank you very much. We're excited to work with you. My name is whatever, because this is the first email being sent off on behalf of the project manager. And I'm going to be the project manager at this company. The next step is to fill out the planning forms. And then they can go ahead and do that. So you notice there's actually 3 things now. There's the onboarding forms that we're going to get them to fill out because we need additional information likely. And then in addition to that, we're also going to send them down client notifications. Those client notifications are going to make sure that they fill out the onboarding form and any other requirements, and just ask them and check in with them periodically to make sure that everything's good. And then lastly, we're going to create that project management system and ClickUp. And all 3 of those things are going to be different modules that we're going to be covering next. So thanks guys for watching this, and I'll see you guys in the next module.